So for our monochromatic painting, we already have our composition worked out. So we're using the composition from the last painting we made, and we have our values and our shapes and everything created. Now with this composition, I drew it in, which was based on the cut paper, but I drew it in pencil first, and you can do that again for this week's painting, but if you want, you can also just start painting. So I'm going to show you how I would just start painting without using a pencil drawing first. Again, completely up to you. I just like to give you a lot of options. So I have my monochromatic value scales here. If you have them on another piece of paper, just make sure you're able to see them. And I'm going to do 2 wells of blue. Blue is the color that I've chosen. You can choose any color that you want. And then I'm going to have white and black, and keeping my paints close by, knowing that I'll probably end up using them. And as you saw from the value scale, we ended up using more white and less black. So you could end up squeezing out more white if you want to, and just a little bit of black. But it really depends on what your painting is gonna look like, so up to you. So what I usually start with, especially if I'm working on white paper or white canvas, is the midtones. So I'm gonna create just a blue. I'm adding a little water to my paintbrush, and I'm gonna create a midtone here in the middle. So I'm gonna add a bunch of white. And I'm gonna add a little more water because this is just kind of my drawing in my painting. And I'm looking at my composition the entire time, but I can make some changes if I want. So I'm gonna just start getting in some of these shapes. I guess this is almost like drawing. And I'm realizing this needs to come out a little more because I do want to keep, I have these steps in here that I want to keep. So with painting, I think we have to be okay with it not looking great at first. I'm just getting more color and more water on here so I can fill it in, and just to keep going. And then remember, I can always use the background to adjust these shapes. So I'm just really working on getting my big shapes in. Probably use a bigger brush too. And you could do an outline of them more like you're drawing, or you can fill them in like I'm doing. And I did have this area that was kind of a focal point, so I'm gonna start by drawing that, even though that's kind of the negative space, and just making sure I get that in. And again, you can make changes if you want to yours, but I'm gonna pretty much go, you know, it's going to look different because it's a different color and it's gonna have a different vibe, but and I might actually make this, now that I'm drawing it or painting it, make this go off the edge here a little more. And then I have this big shape over here. And maybe I'll kind of zoom it in a little more. So I'm just mixing up more color, giving myself more to work with. And switching up the composition a little bit. Totally up to you how you go about this. Okay, so I'm gonna continue. I'm gonna get a little bit of a bigger brush, and I'm looking at my values here, and this was pretty dark, and over here is light. So I'm gonna start working light to dark and then get my background in, and then come back in and work on my edges a little more. So I'm gonna make a nice light color in here to start with, but enough that will show up on the white paper, right? And I'm just gonna start filling these in, filling my big shapes in and refining. And I'm thinking about my values. I'm also thinking about transparency, and I'm thinking I might use that more in the background, but I can add water here, and we can see the transparency makes a lighter value. So while the paint is still wet, you have the opportunity to add water. And I know when I was first making this, I thought this looked like a wave. And now that there's blue here, I think I really have that opportunity to make it look water-like, where in the grayscale, it really turned into something else, right? But here, if I'm using the transparency and different values, I can really get this looking maybe more watery and play around with that. And I kind of like how some of these edges some are fuzzy and some are solid. So I'm going to leave them for now, and I can use the background too to adjust that. So this shape, I'm going to make a little bit of a darker value. And now that this is wet, I can use this edge to create some interesting edges. So I can soften it here with a wet brush to unify, right? A softer edge will help unify, where a harder edge will create some contrast. And you can try now while you're in here. I have a clean brush. It's a little bit damp, so I'm gonna dry it off on my rag a little bit. You can even take your fingers and dry it off. And you can try picking up some paint like that with a drier brush and kind of making this edge a little more interesting, giving it more texture. You can experiment with that. Clean it off. So when you have kind of a dry, clean brush, it picks up some of the pigment and paint, which is kind of fun to do. So we're adding paint, but you can also do some subtraction. I'm gonna leave that for now and see how it dries, and keep going with this little bit of a darker blue in here, filling in this shape. And take a lot of blue, get this really blue. And I do want to create sort of a harder edge here. We have lots of softer edges. Cleaning my brush and drying it, getting more pigment on here, drier pigment on here. And I want to create kind of a solid edge here, which I'll also use my background to help with. And while it's drying, I want to think about, before it totally dries, this edge looks very contrasting and like a solid edge. So I just want to soften my edges a little bit before they dry, because I think I want this to be soft. I'm not sure. It's easier to make a soft edge harder, but it's difficult to make soften a hard edge once it's dry, if that makes sense. So if you're not sure what your edges are gonna look like, you might just soften them up, blur them up a little bit before the paint dries, because I think I'm gonna let some soft stuff happen around here. So I'm just gonna soften everything and smooth it out before it dries too much. But this one, I want to keep a more crisp, sharp edge. And I haven't added any black to my blue paint. Let me move my table a little bit so I'm out of the sun there for you. So I'm going to make these shapes much darker. There's some water in my palette, of course. I'll get over here. clean it up. Okay. That was a lot of black and it had water in it. So I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna take just a little bit of black. Come over here so I can get a couple different black tones. Or shades, really. I'm gonna start filling this in. And I'm feeling like I want these steps to maybe be more crisp, which I can use the background to also help with. I'm also gonna take some blue from here. Now I'm adding a little water so I can give this darker blue some transparency, and then we can see the blue that was underneath is mixing in and showing through a little bit, which is kind of interesting. And I do need some more blue paint, so I'll put that over here and kind of use the edge of my palette to wipe it off. And in my value scale, I really liked this color, so I'm gonna try to get close to that, see if I can get close to that again. You can even come over here and do a little, that's pretty close. Can kind of do a little color matching. Trying to get that color and get these shapes in. I'm adding a little water so I can smooth out the paint and kind of fill it. And now I haven't thought about what this edge is going to be. In my black and white composition, I have it blended. So I think I'm going to leave it soft until I get the background in and really see how I feel about these color contrasting. Okay, let's get the background. So on this side, I'll have it a little darker, and I think the watery. So I'm taking these two dark colors, kind of mixing them together, and I'm gonna add a little more water. So I'm just dipping my brush in and adding water to this. And start painting in here. And remember, this is gonna help with the edges from the background, so the figure ground, so the background and the shape relationship. And we're gonna think about how we want that relationship to exist in our painting. Do we want it to, sort of fade together? How do we want our shapes to connect to our background? Do I want it to be soft? More like that, and I'm just using water? Or do you want to create a harder, sharper edge to create this contrast? So this is completely up to you. It's your choice. Here, maybe I'll do a harder edge over here and get a smaller brush. So I'm drying off this brush a little. I'm gonna get paint on it and do a more solid edge here, just so you can see what I'm talking about thinking about your edges and how they'll look. And you can keep making adjustments, but like I said, it's easier to go to harden a soft edge. Like I could come back, I made all these edges really soft, so I could come back and paint a hard edge over it. But if you have a hard edge and you want to soften it and it's dry, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. So if you're not sure in a section, I would just go ahead and soften it up just by using the water. And I just did, and the way I was brushing made it kind of a cool texture. So when I do something like that, I'll just like repeat it because I actually like the way that that looks. I'm gonna keep this, all of this, a pretty hard edge. And then this, I think, needs to soften up a little bit if there's a hard edge on one side. So this is a harder edge, and then blending into a soft edge. Blend that in a little more. I'm cleaning my brush off and getting a little water on it so I can blend a little bit. So here the background is blending into the shape. All right, I'm going to keep going over here. Add water on the paper first to help get this blended in. And I want this in my black and white composition. This is really light, but I think here I want it to be dark. So I'm getting my paper wet, and I want to create some cool effects here with the wet paint on the wet paper. Because remember, we're working with transparency, which affects the values as well. We're working with saturation levels, we're working with the dark and light values. So I really want you experimenting with all of these things and pushing your paint to a different place than you had it before. And now I'm gonna come back to the light and maybe get some lights in here while this is still wet to lighten up a bit of the background. And blend it in a bit. And then this is where I wanted to make a pretty solid, sharp edge. And that's not happening right now because I have a lot of water in my paint. So what I'm going to do, and we didn't make this on the value scale, but I'm going to take a really light blue. I'm gonna grab some blue from over here where I had it squeezed out of the tube. And I'm gonna add a little bit of black to it. So it's kind of like a gray scale blue. Let me just see how that looks, a gray blue. And I'm not adding a lot of water. Almost looks like whiteout. So I'm really redefining these steps here. All right, just had to move the table out of the sun again. I'm getting chased by the sun in my studio. Okay, hopefully you can see that. And then I'm gonna add a little water to this because it got really dry. And I'm just trying to get some values, some color down on the entire piece of paper. And then I can go back and refine. So starting a painting isn't always, it's not gonna look the way you want it to look right away. You keep adjusting and you keep going. And I think starting a painting, you know, some people just stop because they get to a point where they don't like the way it looks. And I would just encourage you to keep going because it's like writing an essay, or when people write a novel, they always talk about how their first draft is so terrible. And that's the same thing with art, you know, it's not gonna look great right away. You keep going. So you can, of course, if you feel confident in yours, you don't have to watch the whole video, but I'm gonna keep going a little bit more so you can see how I'm continuing to adjust my edges and thinking about the figure ground relationship and my values and everything that I'm asking of you for this project. And I don't know why, but I've been liking these little brush stroke textures I've been making. So I'm gonna come in and I think they're smoothing out some of the brush stroke lines and making it look more intentional. I ruin a lot of brushes this way. That's okay. It's definitely not how you're supposed to handle a good brush, but now I see a bit of a mess, and I know you might be thinking that too. So I'm gonna come in and just even out some of these colors, especially over here needs. So I'm coming in the opposite direction of my original brush strokes and I'm just adding a little water to try to even this out. Here we go. That already looks a little better, more cohesive, because I want both sides of the background to look like they exist in the same composition, right? And this was very thick paint going into paint that had been thinned down by water. So I think I just need to take a little time to smooth this out. Get it looking right. All right, now I'm gonna come and redefine some of the shapes. So I do need more blue. And I'm going to put it in the middle here and get that kind of light blue color going. So I want to really clean my brush. Probably a good time to clean your water if you're coming back and working on your lights again. And I'm going to take a little white because I had added black to some of that white. So I want to get just white and blue. Actually, sometimes I'm gonna take this blue and bring it up to the edge so I know I can dip my brush in there and get some like pure blue. Kind of keep this half with the lighter blue. Okay, I'm gonna first come into my hard edges and redefine them. So I know we talked about this last time, but painting the edges over each other. So the background over the shape and then the shape back over the background to redefine your shapes and get them looking the way you want them to look. Okay, I have a lot on my paintbrush, so I'm gonna spread it out a little bit, and then I'm gonna come in with my water, and I'm just kind of taking some of the water off with the edge. And I did want to keep this part watery, so I am going to soften my edges here and the paint I just laid down. And I'm going to kind of do this technique to soften this edge up. And I might just have it fade into the corner here so it doesn't really look like, so the shape kind of gets obliterated. And that got like too brush strokey, or the lines were too straight. So I want to come in and just like soften it, keep softening it up. So you're thinking about your edges, you're thinking about your figure-ground relationship. So the figure in here is the shape and the ground is the background. So how does the shape work with the background? And light colors, you know, pop forward and darker colors move to the back. So this shape that I'm creating is really gonna pop, getting more paint, really gonna pop forward. And I do kind of want to bring back some of this from my original composition, because I think it needs something here. A little water, a little of the blue. I'm gonna bring this back, and then I have to resolve this area that's turning from light to dark. So I'm just adding more paint here, thinking about these edges, how they're going to meet, how two different shapes are going to meet, and how the shape is meeting the background. And I want to fade this out a little bit, smooth this out. And I'm going to come back with my light and work on this edge, because I do think I like a bit of a harder edge over here. So I'm getting more paint. And working on this. So keep refining as you go. All right, let's see. Now with some of the darker shapes, I can come back in with my darker color. And I think this edge needs a little more refinement here. And I actually like the way the brush strokes are showing up here, these sort of vertical lines. So I'm going to keep that and then maybe blend it into these more circular brush strokes in the circular part of it. Sometimes you just have to let the paint do its thing. Take a little more paint in here and just a bit of the black. Get this color going. There we go. Wanted a little more of that like dark teal color. All right, so you're gonna keep going and adjusting as we've been doing and working on your foreground and your background and getting them to a place that feels right to you. Like, I think this background needs to be a little lighter, and then just keep working on your edges. Refining your edges. I know I already did a long demo with the black and white one, so I don't want to keep you too long here. And then you can add details as you see fit. So, you know, you could do more definition here. Getting a smaller brush helps too. You could do these dry brush techniques, and this creates, you know, a different kind of edge for these more kind of open shapes. Getting just a lot of pigment on here, a lot of dry paint. And thinking about how I want to adjust this. Until it feels right and it feels finished to me. And that is your choice, you know, it's your painting, so it's up to you what you want it to look like. And what means finished to you. And you can think about some of the artists that we looked at. You know, you can try some outlining of your shapes. I think the nice thing about doing abstract shapes is they don't have to look like anything. You can always make changes, and it's not going to look wrong. You know, it's not going to look like you don't know how to draw a person or a foot or whatever. If you're doing, you know, if you're drawing people or painting people, it's not going to look like you did something you didn't mean to do. It's not going to look like a mistake. So you can really experiment, which I think is why doing these abstract shape compositions is really great for learning about how to mix color and how to work with paint and how to work with composition before you start getting into more complex experiments with drawing realistic things. Though a lot of abstract painters and non-representational painters started drawing really traditionally and painting really traditionally and realistically, and then the abstraction is what they evolved their work into over time, just simplifying compositions down to their big shapes. I'm doing a lot of layering on this, and you can see how that creates like a richer, darker tone. You can try, you know, some of the mixing can happen on the paper and with your brush, and some can happen in the palette. And just keep going. That is my best advice. Just keep going. If you think you've gone too far, that's good. There, you know, it's good. You know, you never know where your edge is until you go over it. In art, it's good to experiment with that. Maybe not in other parts of life. But in art, it's great to find where that edge is and make a mess and make something that you don't feel great about. And that's going to help you get to the next painting that you do feel great about, or the next work of art that you do feel great about. Okay, I am going to stop because I could just keep going forever. Sometimes it's good to know when to stop. For this demonstration, I think that's enough for you to see how to create those edges, how to use the different values, and, you know, take your composition from last week and make something new and have fun experimenting.